Hello, good creatures, and welcome. My name's Petrina Calder, and I'm here with my friend Nate.
Hello, I'm Nate Bolding, and today on The Creatures We Become, we're diving into a book by Dr. James Doty, Mind Magic, The Neuroscience of Manifestation and How It Changes Everything.
The topic of manifestation has seen a resurgence, and it seems as though it's everywhere in pop culture right now. But Dr. Doty brings a scientific lens to it that we found intriguing.
Yes, I first heard Dr. Doty speaking about manifestation on the Mel Robbins podcast, and there were such great points made, and he was such a great speaker that inspired me to send something over to Petrina and look at this book and what insights he might have for us and our audience.
Yeah, it turns out that Dr. Doty outlines some very practical information that helps to pull the idea of manifestation out of the realm of magical thinking and into the world of pragmatic and helpful strategies for everyone.
Now, I really enjoyed this book. I learned a lot and had very huge key takeaways and found it very applicable in my own life. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Great. So I think probably the first thing we should talk about is, what does Dr. Doty mean by manifestation grounded in neuroscience? And maybe how does the way he talks about neuroscience, how does that differ from the way it's typically talked about in pop culture?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I never had any aversion to the topic of manifestation, but kind of my preconceived notions was it was basically just creating a perception and of your own value and toward some given outcome, some goal, and then kind of almost like, I don't know, maybe like hacking the universe, but I didn't get too wooey about it because it kind of made sense for me, because it's like if we just had a goal that we wanted to achieve and we were constantly thinking about it and we were constantly putting it into, to say, the front of our lens and our ideals, and we just kind of kept thinking about it and talking about it and pursuing, kind of made sense to me that you'd sort of move towards that topic. But I think there was some preconceived notions for me that it wasn't as grounded in the reality of the world from my lens, being from a background of more sort of anatomy and physiology when it comes to human workings. For me, it wasn't necessarily kind of a religious view of what I thought a manifestation was. I just kind of looked at it like it was this thing where you thought about it, talked about it, and kind of moved towards your goals. And I didn't ever really think anything second of it after that.
Yeah.
What about you? What are your thoughts on manifestation before this book?
Before this book, I had a really negative view of the idea of manifestation. But there's some cultural context for that. Like, I grew up, there was this whole thing that kind of through probably the late 90s, there was a lot of like mysticism and woo-woo that people got into around like reading books by Carlos Castaneda and some of like the old historic figures that were more into like the occult and esoteric knowledge. And so manifestation was talked about in those circles as though like, oh, it's this esoteric knowledge shared among secret societies, that it was the key to unlocking, potential. And it just had this weird mysticism around it. Then subsequent to that, there was a book that came out called The Celestine Prophecy, which wasn't specifically about manifestation, but I think like this was probably late 90s, early 2000s. And again, it was really big in pop culture and was, again, more about like the woo-woo of like the tapping into the energy fields of the universe and things like that. And again, like I think there's some value in reading those books and to thinking outside the box. Like, things only seem magical. It seems like magic until we can understand it with science, and then we say it's logical, right? And so I am open-minded enough about those things, but again, how these things kind of come up in pop culture and then people kind of glom onto them, and they're popular for 5-10 years and then they're gone. And then the last one that came out was one that came out in the early 2000s, and it was called The Secret, and it was explicitly about manifesting. And I fucking hated that book because reading it, she was clearly ripping off all of the people who came before her. She was ripping off all those people who'd written the esoteric texts, and she was referencing like long histories of Buddhist traditions without actually referencing them, but she packaged it in a way that made it really hyper palatable. And suddenly there was this boom in the early 2000s where everybody was saying one of her mantras, which was believe it, achieve it. And so it was this really naive idea of like, if I just believe that I can do something or I can have something, then my belief alone is the thing that's going to make it happen. And that always rang so hollow for me because of the fact that, like, if you don't take action toward those things, your belief in it alone is insufficient. You need to follow it up with then action. And so I think that's one of the things I really appreciated about Dr. Doty is that he takes some of the magical thinking that was in some of those previous texts and gives some science to the parts of it where there is science. There are some parts that are not scientific yet. It's still a little bit magical. But then he talks about the thing, what do we actually know from science in terms of how our brains work, how our nervous systems work, and then gives us some really practical tips. And he emphasizes that need to take the actions too. You can't just believe it. You need to actually do something with it too, which I appreciated.
Yeah,
did you ever read any of those other books? Like,
no,
as I'm naming them?
So it's funny that you say this. It was like I was totally unaware of manifestation really as a topic. And just like I'd heard of the law of attraction, and just on a face value, it kind of made sense to me. I was like, okay, yeah, it's like if you were thinking about this thing and whether it was praying for it and just putting it right in the front of my viewpoint 24/7, it would make sense that we would move towards this topic because we're just sort of thinking about it, we're talking about it. I'd never sort of thought of it from this sort of pseudoscience lining up with when some of the stuff in the book kind of like lining up with the frequencies of the universe and some of the science we have now on brain frequencies and the frequencies of our heart and certain things like that in comparison to the pseudoscience of just, like you said, just I'm going to pray for this thing every night. I'm going to pray for $1 million, but then I don't go and budget and kind of become financially literate. Or I'm going to pray to be jacked and then never go to the gym.
Right.
I had never I came into this with no viewpoint on manifestation, which is kind of funny because hearing you talk about it is all that, like I would hate that too, especially if you had a good understanding of some of the underlying frameworks of say Buddhism and other culture points and learnings, and then that you just rip topics off. It's kind of like this iceberg thing where you pulled off this principle, but you didn't have the underlying information for that principle to really have a good grasp of what it is and how to apply it to people. And it's almost like it creates this increases the Dunning-Kruger effect that I have this top principle and it makes me feel really confident in this knowledge, but then not having all the depth of information under it and believing I know more than I do. So what do you believe in the book differs from the law of attraction narrative that you had in the past?
Yeah, I think the big thing is that the follow through in terms of like, you need to actually do something with this. It isn't just about, say, dreaming that I want $1 million. You then have to figure out, okay, how is it that I could get $1 million? What are the things that I would need to do to get $1 million? Like, it's not just kind of like, and it's not things like, well, I'm just going to have to start playing the lottery every day. But he talks about kind of thinking about, okay, you want the $1 million. Why do you want the $1 million? What is the $1 million going to do for you? What is the feeling you will have upon receiving this? What is the either the positive emotion that comes with it or the negative emotion that goes away because of it? How does it change how you see yourself? How does it open up opportunities for you? And just really getting clear on like, what does it mean to you? Why do you want this money, right? Because it's not just about the money. It's about what is the feeling you are trying to achieve? And then also thinking about like, okay, and what is it that I need to do to get this money? What is it that who do I need to become in order to
Mhm.
achieve the goal that I'm seeking? And keeping in mind too, that the goal then is not about the money. The goal is about, well, I want to feel uh, financially independent, or I don't want to have to worry about keeping a roof over my family's head, or, it'll be evidence that my business idea was a success, right? What does that money
Mhm.
mean? And then going after manifesting the meaning of the thing, not necessarily the thing itself.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because will really be actually like my first model of
Mm,
manifestation and the law of attraction, which is kind of funny. Like it hasn't even been a notion. So that's like,
okay.
this is the groundwork now on what my how I view manifestation. And I think there's some really key principles that we'll kind of get into, but what I really liked about it was this idea of embedding a given intention
Mm,
into the finite amount of brain real estate that we have, and having a very specific intention we'd like to achieve, but then understanding the why of that attention. That, say, we could be in a mansion and be alone and not have
yeah.
achieved the original goal, which was not be alone because we had a mansion, but to be in a family dynamic that was rich, and not have
Yeah.
a mansion to be rich. And that we have to understand exactly what it is we want to achieve. Then we'd have to understand our current belief systems around things and change those networks. So then we have a very pure and we will go into it, but the salient understanding of exactly what we'd like to achieve, and then get rid of the preconceived notions of why we can't achieve it, and then continue to move forward with X, Y, and Z, and we'll kind of get into that. But I think this framework for manifestation is grounded in reality and not in fantasy, and I'm excited to kind of get into it as we go.
Awesome. So would you like to kind of jump into it? He gives us a 6-step framework for the process of manifesting. Um, and yeah, I think we could just jump into step 1 if you feel like we're ready for that.
Hell yeah. Yeah,
Okay,
I think we are.
cool. So step 1, then he calls reclaiming your power. And so in this step, he emphasizes the importance of kind of regaining control of your attention, that in terms of how our brains work, that what we pay attention to is what gets our energy, and what we invest our time, our energy, our attention into. And so in order for us to manifest something in particular, we need to wrest control of our attention back from all of the distractions that may be drawing our attention away from it, and putting it on what we actually want. There is kind of a prerequisite step that he gives to this one. So kind of before getting into the 6 steps, he recommends a step 0 or a step 0.5 would be first drawing your attention to your life as it is right now, and looking at, what am I currently manifesting in my life right now? So he talks about, whether you intend to or not, you are already manifesting your life as it is. And so look at, what is your life? Who are your important relationships? What is the type of work that you do? How satisfying or rewarding do you find that work? And do you find those relationships? What is the state of your health? What is the state of your financial health? Do you have a sense of fulfillment and purpose? And to look at, what are all the positives and all the stressors in your life as it is right now, and realizing that you have manifested this, that whether you feel like you are a victim of circumstance, and there may be some truth to that for some things, your reality as it is right now is what you are currently manifesting. Then we can regain control of our attention to be more intentional about, then, what is it that we want to manifest that is different from what we have right now. Because odds are you don't want to get rid of the good parts of your life, but you want to change some of the things that are not as satisfying, or that are not healthy, or not working for you in some way. The way he talks about getting that control is through the practice of mindfulness. And so by starting with that, I think that's where I got buy-in on Dr. Doty's version of manifestation, and how for me it was really markedly different from what the other charlatans had been doing in the past.
Right.
Is that it is founded in the principles of mindfulness, and that especially in this age where our attention is a commodity and there's lots of things that are trying to compete for and are crafted to draw our attention toward them, we need to get centered back into ourselves so that we can exercise some choice over where it is we want our attention to go, what we want to be paying attention to. It's really important because of the way our minds are primed to pay attention to things that are salient to us. And so if we're not really intentional, then the success of the marketing machines and the fear-mongering machines of the media cycle will absolutely draw our attention away, because our brains are wired to pay attention to those things if we're not actively trying to look for something else. And the practice that he gives us for doing this is actually by turning inward to do a mindfulness practice that specifically looks at what is the current state of my body right now. So to kind of sit in quiet and just notice, kind of doing a body scan. Where am I holding tension in my body right now? What are the state of my muscles? What emotions might I be feeling right now? What are the thoughts that are preoccupying my mind right now as I'm sitting here? And just noticing what is the state of your own self. And that it's through the discipline of practicing that on a regular basis that we start to gain a little bit more control over our attention, and also to notice what is the current state of my nervous system, because this is where it then gets into the neuroscience. Is that for him, our capacity to manifest is really a lot about regulating our attention systems and regulating our nervous system, especially in terms of that autonomic nervous system. And so it's a big thing that we talk about in my style of therapy, that this is one of the foundation skills that we're always trying to teach folks. And so this really resonated with me. But I know through our conversations, Nate, that you also have a mindfulness practice of your own, and that you use it in your coaching, that you have found real value in it as well. And so why don't you tell us a little bit about what your experience with mindfulness has been, and whether you resonated with this first step of reclaiming your power through mindfulness?
Yeah, I think there's a lot with this that really resonated with me, and I liked it. It's like, what are you currently manifesting? As sometimes we have some experiences that are far outside of our control, but there's a lot of experiences in our life that are well inside our control. And I kind of have this quote that always goes for me, and it's like, with some of the trials we're experiencing in life, why am I complaining about the weather, and why don't I just put on a jacket? So there's some things that are outside of our control, but there's a lot well inside our control. And then, so what we're currently manifesting is the current belief system we have and the actions we're consistently taking in order, in relation to our own life that is in our control. So I like that step one. So like, not everything in your life is something that's directly inside your control, and we're going to focus on what's inside your control. And then, so then when it kind of moves to step two, it's we have to think of the neuroscience of it, because we have these, and he touches on a lot, but it's something that's grounded my education from kin, is the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system, the fight, flight, and freeze, or the sort of rest and digest. And we had this system that was necessary for our survival. The sympathetic nervous system, people like to talk about cortisol and other things in relation to different networks of thinking that, we need to decrease inflammation and cortisol is bad. That's like, okay, yeah, excessive cortisol is bad, but cortisol is part of the network for where we mobilize energy and we get going. So we had to have this system because this tiger is rummaged into our camp and we got to survive. We get into this conflict with another tribe, we have to react. We've had this nervous system developed for these types of long rest periods with initial very high stress points. And that's in contrast to our society now. We don't actually really have a lot of things that are directly going to threat our life within an instant. That's
Hmm.
very rare. Most of our stressors are related to financial, relationship stuff, our job, getting cut off on traffic. Now, there's like, if we're talking about just the society that we live in per se, because there's disparity among the world, but our system was designed for long rest periods and then initial high stress. But our society now is periods of long delayed stress that Doty proposes that doesn't align with the old wiring of our system. So we found ourselves in an environment that actually needs active awareness of our nervous system, because we're not in sort of the landscape that our nervous system developed in. So then we're having these long stressors that are putting us into this fight or flight state, or this high level of sympathetic nervous system arousal delayed. And that's something that our system hasn't been adapted to. And then so now we have a society of people that are more heightened into sympathetic nervous system arousal, but it's continued. It's not as spiked and then the rest period. It's a spike and maybe just a continued existence here. And he tells lots
Yeah.
of stories of some people living in this fight or flight state. And he proposes that we can't possibly achieve anything consistently if we're always in this fight or flight state, because we're not in sort of a creative network, and we're in a system of now. Like, what do I got to do to survive now? I'm stressed out, I can't sleep, like there's just all this stuff going on. And then sort of that comes into my necessary need for a mindfulness practice. So my beginning in mindfulness and meditation wasn't to find some sort of inner self. It wasn't to even control my emotions. It wasn't even to be aware of my emotions. My original sort of step into mindfulness was actually to hack the nervous system. Like I understand this parasympathetic and this sympathetic nervous system. And one of the things that I think for me that was grounded in application that he didn't touch on, that I always touch on with people, is that the phrenic nerve controls the diaphragm for breathing, and it originates from the nerves C3 and C5. Well, the vagus nerve, which is what he talks about, is one of the cranial nerves, and is the main parasympathetic nerve regulating heart rate, digestion, organ function. Now, the little bit of physiology here, because I really like this topic, but it runs from the brainstem down the thorax. So the phrenic nerve and the vagus nerve, blank in there, they travel together. But the phrenic nerve is somatic, which means it's voluntary and can be triggered in reflex for respiration, whereas the vagus nerve is part of the autonomic or involuntary system, and it's part of the rest and digest function and impacts the lungs, heart rate, and other aspects indirectly. So through the phrenic nerve and breathing practices, you can hack the parasympathetic nervous system via the vagus nerve. And I think this is one of the things he didn't touch on as well. The vagus nerve is part of the involuntary system. Now, there's things you can do to affect it, but what I really like that comes from my education is this path from the phrenic nerve. It just made so much sense to me. The first time I learned this, I was like, damn. I was like, so you could just be stressed out and I could sit here and focus on diaphragmatic breathing, and then that would stimulate my phrenic nerve, which would then stimulate my vagus nerve, which would then take me out of a stressful state. So then, that long story short, I had to create that context, because how a lot of people don't, I've noticed there's a misunderstanding of things in the universe. And it's that these things don't connect, and it's all connected.
It's all connected.
There's a long story short. I had to paint out how, from sort of this framework of affecting people's physical states through training and nutrition, is very, very connected. Because I've had people who were just living in anxiety, And if you're just living in anxiety, you're not going to be in a good metabolic state, and you're going to be, and let's just think for talking about muscle mass, anabolism and catabolism. So if you're always stressed out, the system, you got to train it hard, stress it out, and then there has to be this recovery period.
Rest.
So if you're in this constant state of stress, and then you're adding more training stress, you're just going to increase your stress thresholds, and then break through points, and then not have the necessary recovery. And then you can have all sorts of things pop up, tendinitis, stress, motivation comes down. And so one of the things that became very apparent to me was that a practice to increase parasympathetic nervous system drive is really, really important. Because if you have somebody who's extra stressed out, and like, yeah, if we just train, it's not so inverse related that we're going to add some physical stress, and then that would create an overall stress overload. Like sometimes the training could be a positive stress, and there's
Absolutely
other networks there. But so for me, how mindfulness and meditation got introduced was from that one topic. Oh, the phrenic nerve is voluntary. And then if I just breathe diaphragmatically, I can create parasympathetic neural drive. That was really interesting to me. I grabbed that out. I've been giving it to people for 10 years because it just made sense. The long story short, that's how I use mindfulness in my current practice, is just through breathing. And then now, over time, I've got more accustomed to other things, but just focusing on good diaphragmatic breathing is a mindfulness practice, because we're going, instead of being out in the stressors of the world, we're coming in. And just breathing diaphragmatically for me is one of the easiest mindfulness practices to give to people, because everybody's familiar with breathing, but not everybody's familiar with proper breathing mechanics. And
yes.
This will be the last one, transfer over quick, is that we have a tertiary breathing mechanism. And they're not all created equally. So we have diaphragmatic breathing. We have our diaphragm pulling our lungs down, diaphragmatic breathing. We also have expansion and compression. So the rib cage goes out and the rib cage comes in. Second, not as efficient as the first. Third, we have elevation and depression, the most inefficient breathing mechanic. And it's the third breathing mechanic, and it's the most inefficient. And one of the things we've seen in society, and so you could intersect it with this overstressed society, is that we're starting to have people have a primary breathing mechanic for elevation and depression. That's crazy. And you can see it. You can see when people are stressed out, they're breathing up here and then down. And you say, take a deep breath. And they go, and you're like, oh, okay, all right, well, there's some more here. So it kind of, in my coaching, is played out, long story short, in two different ways. Is one, if I just introduce diaphragmatic breathing to somebody, it's going to positively affect their health, because we're creating better respiration. But then two, it's a really good introductory mindfulness practice, because it's taking somebody out of their existence, creating a better breathing mechanic, but then also thinking about how the breath is. And it's in and it's out. And then they start going more internal than external. And then we stimulate that phrenic nerve, which stimulates the vagus nerve, and we create less stressful people.
Yes. It's funny. Like every step in this framework is, Doty does such a great job of just giving you just enough information. But I think when you use this stuff and you know more about it, I think for both of us, we could do a deep dive on every single one of these steps. And it's like, it's hard not to pick up that thread and keep going, because I could also talk about how the difference.
I would love if you kept going with it.
Okay. Because I think there's other things like about how then this regulation of the autonomic nervous system. So when Nate talks about being in a parasympathetic or a sympathetic nervous system state, that's our autonomic nervous system. And it is that fight or flight or that rest to digest. And that is related to things like chronic stress and chronic kind of levels of anxiety we might be experiencing. But it's also related to patterns of how traumatic experiences continue to show up in our daily lives and in our bodies. That's kind of like the part of the embodiment of how trauma affects us, in terms of activating those sympathetic nervous system states, so the fight, flight, or freeze, and that people tend to be in this higher activation of that system state more frequently when they have had trauma in their history. And sometimes that might be like one big T trauma, and sometimes it might be a whole series of small T traumas, and sometimes it's a mix of both. But we see this kind of nervous system. I don't know if it's, I was going to say dysfunction, but I don't know if it's not dysfunction given the person's history, right? It's functioning appropriately given the history, but we need to kind of have some more active ways of regulating it. I think one of the things that's kind of coming up in mental health circles is more therapeutic interventions that are focusing on things like, how do we regulate that nervous system so that people can then engage in the healing that's necessary and recovery. And I think that that's one of the things that Doty is getting at here too, which is that if you look at what your life is currently manifesting and you're manifesting a whole lot of stress, his guess is that your nervous system is probably dysregulated and in a state of sympathetic activation a lot of the time. And so it's like, how do we then regulate that? And there's a lot of interesting research coming out about vagus nerve in particular, and kind of like dorsal versus ventral activation of the vagus nerve, and how we can be either hyper aroused or hypo aroused and needing to get into that homeostatic state. Breathing is one of the ways that we can access that state. And as Nate says, breathing is often one of the very first mindfulness practices that we teach people as well, simply because it's easy, it's accessible. Everybody's breathing all the time. And just by paying attention to your breath, and then if you decide to do some intentional diaphragmatic breathing, so to pay attention to the way your body is breathing, you can also then influence that sympathetic nervous system state. But there are other things that we can do to activate that vagus nerve as well. So Nate talked about how it is a big nerve highway. It's the biggest nerve in our body, and it goes from our brains all the way down into our pelvic floors. And so while it does cross over with the diaphragm, and so breathing is one of the ways we can influence it, there are a few other things that we can do too. So a funny one that makes people... Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna ask you.
Yeah.
Because I think this creates a really good segue. I think he jumps into mindfulness without fully touching on it, and then crosses into manifestation as the same thing. I think it's good to create an understanding of the difference between manifestation and what a mindfulness practice is. And so I introduced breathing as a mindfulness practice. That's very interesting to me. What are the other ways for you that you've discovered to create a more parasympathetic drive? That's an interesting topic.
Yeah. And I think so there's ways to kind of get into a more parasympathetic state, and I'll talk about that. And then that's a separate thing from a mindfulness practice, which is really about controlling where your attention goes, which is another piece of what Doty was talking about. So this very first step, there's multiple pieces to it. But to continue this thread, let's talk about that parasympathetic state. So the funniest one is just because people find it amusing, not because it's necessarily earth-shattering in terms of its ability to regulate your nervous system. But one of the places in our body where the vagus nerve is closest to the surface is actually, so it's in our cranium, in our head, and it's actually very close to the roof of our mouths. And so if I'm meeting with somebody who's really stressed out and I see that they're in a sympathetic state, like I can see that they're doing that shallow breathing, and maybe they're like showing other signs of anxiety, like they're fidgety or they're just kind of wide-eyed. I will ask them, okay, so you are feeling really anxious right now, or you're really stressed out right now. where is your tongue in your mouth and why is it jammed up into the roof of your mouth? Because it is always that when people are in that heightened state, if they're not talking, often they've got their tongue pressed up into the roof of their mouth and it presses on the nerve. It's something that we do unconsciously. And every time I ask people, like, where is your tongue right now? And then if they just kind of look at me funny, I'll say, why is it jammed up in the roof of your mouth? And universally, then they start laughing because it is. And they're like, how did you read my mind? And so just by noticing that, I think it might be related to how some people clench their jaw as well. And so just by releasing that tension and bringing your tongue out from the roof of your mouth, it stops at least pressing on the vagus nerve in a way that can be activating to it. The other way that we can kind of trigger it, and the way I kind of explain it to clients, is that your autonomic nervous system is like an on-off switch. You're either in a parasympathetic state or a sympathetic state. So the sympathetic state is the activated one. A parasympathetic state is the rest and digest one. And it's on or off. There's no sliding scale between the two of them. It's either you're in one or the other. And so it's what are the things that can flip the switch to go back and forth between the two. So a second one is by using our visual inputs, because when we are in a sympathetic state, one of the things that happens is that we get tunnel vision because we get very focused on the tiger who's invaded our camp or whatever it is, whatever the threat is. And so by intentionally activating our peripheral vision, it flips the switch out of the sympathetic state and into a parasympathetic state. And so you can do it by intentionally like holding your fingers in front of you like this, keeping your eyes looking forward, but then moving your fingers out to the side as far as you can, and trying to always be looking at your fingers, and then you stop when you can't see them anymore. It activates your peripheral vision in a way that gets it to flip over. You can also do it like it just if you're out and about by intentionally trying to take in the whole of the horizon in front of you all at once. You take in more of your field of vision and try and also include, like, not just seeing further into the distance, but seeing more of the landscape of the whatever's in your field of vision. And by doing so, it activates the parts of our brain that then need to be in a sympathetic state in order for us to, or sorry, a parasympathetic state in order for us to be able to do it. And then
I love that.
Have you ever?
Those. Yeah. It's funny because it touches on some stuff that I do with people. Like just go. Yeah, right. Go for a walk. Like you're stressed out. Go for a walk. And that's just such an interesting takeaway. I've never thought about that. Because one of the things that comes up for me a lot of times is, and I think it's destructive, is people are scrolling in their downtime. And then so at a point when, like, even at work, something crazy's gone on. Oh my God. And they're looking
locked
at their
in.
Small little box, or it's like the last hour. One of the things that's come up with some, like, say, mothers or fathers that I've worked with is they put their kid to bed and they just want a little bit of downtime, and so they stay up an hour by themselves. And okay, so you stayed up an hour by yourself to create some downtime, and then you locked in on social media. And I've ranted about some of the dopamine related things to that, but just from the focal point of in your downtime, you're doing an activity that highlights the sympathetic nervous system.
Yes.
And I'm a really big tool person, which is, I liked that. Because that's something you could do anywhere at any time, and you don't have to go for a walk. And then another one would be going for a walk. But I think that's a really good takeaway. I like the tongue one too, because then it's just like, it's the same thing. It's like, notice if you're breathing like this versus notice if you're breathing diaphragmatically. Notice if your tongue is rammed into the roof of your mouth. I think that is very interesting. So you also, it sounded like you were going to go into it. You also highlighted different dorsal states. Could you touch on that, or is that what you were going to touch on?
No, I had a third kind of technique that I was going to suggest. I think in terms of that whole, like,
no, I like it. I like tools. Yeah.
Okay, so the third tool is one that is sometimes a little bit harder to do. You have to kind of be more intentional about doing it. And then if you are a woman who has given birth vaginally, there might be some iffy things around doing this as well, just in terms of incontinence. But it's actually the other place where the vagus nerve is closest to the surface of the body, or closest to the muscles that you have voluntary control over, is in your pelvic floor. And so by intentionally relaxing the muscles of your pelvic floor, you can take pressure off of the vagus nerve. It's also a place in our body that for people who have history of trauma or stress, our pelvis is a place where we tend to see people carrying lots of dysfunctional patterns of tension. A lot of people end up going to pelvic floor physio, or I mentioned specifically women who have given birth vaginally, because often there's been some like damage through that if they haven't done pelvic floor physio post-birth, then sometimes there's a little bit of dysfunction in terms of how the muscles fire and relax, that just the patterns of how those muscles work gets a little dysfunctional. At any rate, the idea being that often when we are in a state of stress, we will be holding tension in our bodies. And one of the places we commonly hold tension is in our pelvic floor. It's especially true for people who have any kind of a history of traumatic sexual abuse, men or women. There's often a lot of tension in the pelvic floor muscles, and it activates the vagus nerve. And so it's one of those things that learning how to gain voluntary control over those muscles and learning how to relax them, and sometimes there needs to be some intentional squeezing of those muscles in order to get the reciprocal relaxation response after kind of letting go. That one takes a little bit more practice to figure out how to do it. But it is another one that certainly for people who I work with who have experienced trauma in the past, that's one that I commonly teach to people, just because even you think about, like, if you're going to take a moment to sit down and do a mindfulness practice your diaphragmatic breathing, then you might also check in and see, where am I holding tension in my body, and is where I'm holding tension in my pelvic floor, and can I briefly give myself some relaxation by letting go of those muscles? Because, like I said before, that autonomic nervous system tends to be in the on or off position, and so sometimes the way that we get out of that chronically high sympathetic state is by just flipping the off switch, and it'll keep flipping itself back into the on state. And so we kind of have to repeatedly do it over and over again. But through practice of doing that, we can kind of influence, on average, how much of that sympathetic versus parasympathetic state are we existing in on a daily basis.
I love that. That's very interesting to me. I wanted to stay here for a bit because I think there's some crossover between our own expertises that are really valuable for people that are outside. You can manifest all you want, but when you're doing that breathing practice and you're breathing like this all the time and you're not aware of it, I think it can be a serious roadblock. I think that's very interesting. So one, focusing if you're stressed out, I think there's some tools there that are really good, and just a good tool to do at any point, not just a mindfulness practice, but the diaphragmatic breathing and focusing on breath going down into your rib cage and your rib cage expanding and compressing versus rib cage coming up and coming down. Go for a walk or do this, if you can't go for a walk, this fingers together and trying to pay attention to how far that you can see them in your peripheral vision, and then do a couple. Would you do a couple of those? And is there a specific amount of time you ever do with that?
I haven't been prescriptive about giving people a certain amount of time. I just because it's more about just noticing, does it help? How does it feel? I guess I do this one very seldom. I use it as a teaching thing to teach people how to actively activate their peripheral vision. But I think it's more natural to do it if you're out for a walk, or even I'll do it when I'm driving sometimes. It's just taking more of the field, especially because when I'm driving, if you're really stressed because you're driving, you're laser focused, but that's actually not the safest way to be taking in and scanning your environment. You want to be more in that relaxed state that can take in more of your surrounding environment. Is actually a safer state to be in when you're driving. So I'll do it often then.
Well, and that's big. Anything that creates awareness is step one.
Yeah.
And the last one that I really thought was interesting there was the pelvic floor muscles, because one of the things that I'm aware of is postural related things. So when people are flexed, like you can think this position when they're flexed over and they
Yeah.
have their butt tucked underneath them in more of a posterior pelvic tilt,
Yeah.
this is a big sign of constant stresses and some other stuff. But one of the things that makes me think of is some of those sexually related traumas. A lot of times you see people are protecting their pelvis. And so they're really flexed over, their pelvis is tucked underneath them. One of the things I notice that's very common is these people have a horrible time learning hinging because they have to learn how to untuck their pelvis.
Yeah.
And that's not a position it's not just that they're not consciously aware of it, it's that they have some neural guarding around that position,
Yeah.
and plays into some other things. But just that was actually a learning point for me. I connected two dots, which I thought was really interesting. Um, I think those are some really good tools. Now, do you have anything else on that one before we move to step two?
I think I'll just bring it back to one of Doty's points, because I think we've taken a deep dive on the regulation of the nervous system, which Doty does say is really important. You can't be in that sympathetic, stressed out state when you're manifesting, that you actually need to have regulated your nervous system. But the second piece of this first step is about controlling where your attention goes, that you need to be developing a practice that will give you more mastery over choosing where am I going to put my attention, because our attention is selective, and either we're letting our environment select where our attention is going to go, or we are intrinsically choosing where our attention is going to go. And so that's, I think, the last point I wanted to place emphasis on with this daily reclaiming your power and doing this mindfulness practice is also about controlling your attention, so that in future steps, you can be intentional about what you're paying attention to.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, because it goes into some concepts with related to that attentional awareness that I really liked, and it comes into an information processing model
Mm,
that we have. Say, I like the number he used. You can read the book if you want the specific number, but something like there was 100,000 bits of information going on every second in the brain, and then that we can only pay attention to about, say, 10,000 bits of information that we're consciously aware of. And I think that's really interesting because you can, if you're wanting to start to manifest per se, and then you start with hacking the nervous system and then creating a more parasympathetic drive, so you're calm and creative, and then you're paying attention to your awareness and you're putting the number one thing in front of your attention consistently. And then that goes it perfectly into step two is what are we putting in front of our face? And I
exactly.
think, so step two in his framework was clarifying the desires. So this relates to identifying authentic goals that are aligned with values. So I think this is a big life thing that I think this really becomes aware to you when you've gone through some scenarios that have put you into a place that you're not happy with over time. So he uses the story of the dot-com crash destroying his finances, but he's in his mansion, and that he's in his mansion and is devoid of life. That he's gone through a separation with his partner, and his daughter is away at university, but also not just away at university, like glad to be not in the home.
Yeah.
And he finds himself in this desolate wasteland of family values, but he's in that mansion that he thought of from his childhood, where he grew up in an underprivileged home, and he imagined this mansion on the bay overlooking the ocean. And now he finds himself financially broke, but desolate for the family connections. And he talks about, say, when he was a kid and he was visualizing that journey, he just had sort of money as the face value. There was other things related to it, like the house and stuff, but he wanted to create financial freedom to be able to avoid the stresses of his past in relation to the family dynamics. It's like that financial success didn't mean anything without a family to share it with. And so he found himself in that financial success with a total crash, but also then not having the dynamic that he actually really would have, say, like would have been the better destination. And so he talks about clarifying that and aligning with your values. So I think sometimes it's hard to really understand your own values until you come into some scenarios that you're not that happy with. And I can really identify in my own journey some of these things. We often get caught in the success loop,
Mhm.
where we're constantly thinking of more and what's the next step and what's the bigger achievement that we'll then get to, that everything's going to be all right and we're going to finally be happy when we get to that point in time. And I think that's a very common state with people. And what you get with that is, why did you want to be successful in the first place?
Hmm.
Was this because you were shown unconditional love as a child and you feel like success is going to be the validation that you were finally worthy? Uh, is this because, for in his step, you wanted to be financially powerful so that you could not be subjected to the type of stresses that he was faced in, and then he wanted to have financial power, but what he really wanted to have was richness in family dynamics.
Mhm.
And so that his quest for power and his quest for financial success got in the way of the real principle, which was rich in family love and family dynamics, and that house was a mansion with a family. It wasn't a mansion on the bay. Now, I don't think you have to have found yourself into some horrible wasteland to come to this topic. But I think for me, I was in the perfect place when I read this book, because I kind of found myself in this position where I've achieved some of the success points that I would like to. And I had much, much more. But I found myself in this loop of not ever being happy and continuously having some sort of destination that I wanted to achieve, and then I'll be happy then. So kind of I started to clarify my desire for what happy meant.
Yeah.
And I think it's really relevant. I'm not going to show it. Maybe you can see it. So right on the front, it's backwards for you and the listeners, or if you're watching this. But so on the front of my phone, I have my life's priorities and my life's hindrances. And this kind of crosses over with values. I just think it's an easier talking point for myself that really illustrates this point.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a catastrophic thing that plays out to put you in a destination you didn't want to, and you could just clarify your values from the beginning. And that's what he's talking about here. So one of the things that I've gone over is my life priorities. My number one priority is wisdom. My second priority is happiness, and happiness is broken up into living a life of meaning over novelty. My third priority is love or a romantic relationship. My fourth priority is success in my endeavors. And my fifth priority is adventure. Now, I've quantified exactly what those mean to me. And then my life's hindrances are poverty or financial ignorance, ignorance and confusion in life in general, and ingratitude. So that was something that actually started to kind of interplay as I was reading this book. That was a really big takeaway of mine. And I came up with those priorities so that I could never find myself in that loop of consistently looking for success in order to attain happiness. And I quantified what happiness meant to me and what things in life do I truly value. And at the end of the day, I would be happy with my life if I pursued those values. And so his step one was identifying authentic goals aligned with values. So I just describe some of my values and my priorities, but do we want a house for a house, or do we want a home? And identifying something that aligns with your values is step one. And then that'll be on your front of identifying those things. And then he talks about visualizing vividly. So then he goes through some mindfulness practices, and we've gone in depth on some of those, of specific practices to do every day that take something from just an understanding, create it clearly, then putting it into a, say, verbal sense, and then putting it into a written sense, and then reading it back. So this was actually the topic that got me on James Doty in the first place. I just thought that was really interesting. So imagine, say, we put this into context. Say, imagine what a home means. Like, what are the sounds that I come into? What are the senses that I come into? So I come into a home and I'm greeted with love. There's maybe cooking on the stove. There's a child excited to see you, a dog excited to see you, whatever it is that you visualize. And that it's a home. So we imagine that. What are the smells? What are the visualizations? What are the experiences for coming into a home? And then we put that into a statement. And we imagine it, and we say it out loud, and we write it, and then we read it back. And so that we've vividly gone through a visualization of exactly what we'd like to achieve. And this is a really big principle for me in just sports. Let's say there's many sports I've participated in, but let's just think of bodybuilding. Some of those stage routines, I'm freaking posing around in the living room naked and just visualizing that I'm on stage, going through the poses, going through exactly the artistic expression I'd like to impact. Yeah. So now we're taking this proven principle of visualization and we're putting into creating an intention that we'd like to achieve over time. And that lastly, you'd want to prefer or create visualizations that are more identity based and contribution orientated goals over materialistic ones. So I've described more identity contribution related goals over materialistic ones. So materialistic one would just be that I want a mansion, and I'm just thinking about that mansion over and over again, versus I want a home and I want to be the father of value coming to that home. And there could be other things detailed to that. And so you got anything on step 2 you'd like to go into?
Yeah, I think it's another one we could take a deep dive on. And so I think we will need to pick and choose where we're going to dive into things, because I love so much about this step 1, that idea about clarifying your goals. I learned through experience, and I think maybe this is one of those. I heard Chris Williamson the other day referred to what he called unteachable lessons, which is that lessons you can't teach to somebody else. They need to live it themselves in order to learn the lesson. I could tell you about it, but it's not going to actually change it for you. You're just going to have to live it, which is that I think you need to manifest the wrong things for yourself by accident to really get the point of what it means to be intentional about clarifying your goals. Because I learned that I can manifest almost anything that I put my mind to, but I have accidentally manifested what I thought I wanted. So it's not even manifesting terrible things in my life. It's just they're things that I thought would make me happy, and then they did not make me happy. So I have shared that, this is a second career for me. Being an occupational therapist is a second career for me, and that my first career was in human resources, but I actually went and did a whole degree in business administration where I majored in accounting, because I thought that would be like the stability, and I was good with numbers, so I should go do that. And like applied myself, did really well in school, got hired straight out of school, got a decent job, had a pension, the whole 9 yards, and I was miserable. So it's like I manifested exactly what I had imagined for myself. It just didn't make me happy the way I thought it would. And so I think sometimes, if you find yourself one day, dear listener, learning that unteachable lesson for yourself, just know that you are in good company, and that I think that sometimes we humans have to live our lives by trial and error. We don't know whether or not something will make us happy or not until we give it a try. And it's only then, when we're actually living in the new reality, that we learn whether or not it actually will make us happy. And at the same time, to Doty's point, I do think that the more clear we can be about who we are, and what our values are, then the less likely we are to make really egregious mistakes in terms of manifesting things that make us miserable rather than happy.
Yeah, you.
No, go.
I was gonna say that it's interesting because it's like I think it's worthy to touch on it. There's a reason for me that a romantic relationship is number 3 of my priorities above success, because I found myself in places where I was achieving success at the cost of my closest intimate relationship, and suffering is the clarity from ignorance. And I really like that quote, because that's something I've thought a lot about, is that sometimes we have to suffer first, and sometimes our greatest sufferings are the greatest teachers. And I think you don't need, say, something like this to happen to play out into clarifying things, but I think there is such value to clarifying these things first, and even just knowing that you can just totally fail and you can have some things that put you in a position that life is not good, but that suffering is teaching you something, and you can learn from it and get better, or you can continue to be ignorant and suffer again. And I think this clarifying the desires is such a important step, and you're gonna have some screw ups, but I think this is something that I'd never even thought about, something like clarifying what success meant to me, and what how important an intimate partner was to me, until I suffered from it. But if I had just clarified that from the beginning, maybe I would have avoided that suffering, and maybe I would have suffered in something else. But I think it's such a good step that I didn't take earlier in time, and I'm glad that I've had some learnings come up that have put me into a place now to do it.
Absolutely. I think that's the silver lining in the cloud of messing up sometimes, is that we learn a lot more about ourselves and have the opportunity to then grow and improve as we go. You and I have had many conversations about our core values and about kind of how we have identified them and how we articulate them and how we center them in our lives. For listeners at home who might be interested in this, one book that we have both read and talked about a lot is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And that's one of the things that Stephen Covey talks about in that book, is about clarifying what your values are and then building kind of your mission statement around those things. And I think if you're not clear on, if you get to step 2 and you're not sure about how to clarify your desires, if you are kind of really caught in that trap of, like, a lot of pop culture manifesting stuff is about manifesting, the luxury car and the luxury vacations, and here's me on a first class flight, and here's me on a private jet, and here's me holding an envelope full of cash, and like whatever, right? There's a lot of materialism associated with manifesting these days. And if you're caught up in that and you're struggling to figure out, like, what is my why? Why do I want the private jet? Like, why would that be meaningful for me? What is the feeling I'm trying to achieve with those things? Then I think that going and reading a book like The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People and doing some exploration of your values could be really helpful. I know, Nate, you have also taken a couple of courses through the Exercise Therapy Association, and that's where some of your values exploration has come from. So that's another resource that we could point people to.
Yeah, I was going to say, if there's a very specific drill that really helped me with my priorities, and if this is something that's interesting to you, just reach out to me and I'll send you the document. It's called Priorities Revolution.
Cool. Because I think those kinds of tools are really helpful for people, because it is an abstract way of kind of seeing your life. And I think if, especially if you're relatively young, like if you are in your 20s and figuring this stuff out, then I think having some of those resources earlier in life can really set you up for some good manifesting pretty early on. The second piece of this that I think is really where a lot of magic happens, is in that visualization piece. And it is one of these things that, like, we've got lots of science behind visualization, especially coming from sports science, although it is also used in researching in industrial and organizational psychology, just about performance psychology in general, the psychology of high performers, and how visualizing things, visualizing the desired outcome, the state of being, the perfect performance, or whatever it is a really powerful tool for success. It seems like our brains can't distinguish between what is something vividly imagined and something that is a memory. And so the more we can visualize having done it, having had the success, having performed as needed, the more it kind of convinces our brain that we already have this potential in us. It has already happened, and that it results in better performance for people. Not just in terms of like high performers, but I think like this is a tool I use in my life all the time. I think I have shared before that during times where I have been feeling stressed out or overloaded, and particularly if I know I've got a big day coming up with some things that are important and or that have tight timelines, and I need things to go a particular way in order to win the day, in order to be successful for the day. And so in those instances, what I will usually do is the night before, I will sit down and I will create myself like an agenda of like the timeline of how things are going to go. To give a really simple but concrete example, because I do this kind of thing all the time, but to give a very concrete example, it's that if I need to get up and be at the airport for like a 6:30 in the morning flight, and so I have to get there very early and get up really early. I'm not a morning person and I struggle with travel anxiety. And so I will just write down a list of like, okay, when I wake up, my alarm is going to go off at this time. And then here's the exact steps I need to take in the order I need to take them in order to get myself to the airport and on that flight on time. And then I will write out the list, and then I'll just visualize and imagine myself doing it stress-free, not rushing from thing to thing, but just getting up and going, okay, first I do this, then I do that, then I do the next thing. And anytime I have done that, the next morning has been entirely stress-free. It's gone without a hitch, no problems. And it's almost like, because I mean, unexpected things can come up. You could have car trouble, or you could get to the airport and the security line is longer than you anticipate it's going to be. But that's never happened for me on the days when I've done the visualization. Things have gone exactly as I imagine them on the days I've done the visualization. So it feels like there's a little bit of magic to it. But it is one of those things that the research bears it out in terms of it being a really effective practice for getting you the outcomes that you're looking for.
Yeah, and this is a big thing for me because I have a lot of anxiety around public speaking, and I think it's sort of from some of my negative learning experiences and social dynamics when I was a kid. Whenever I'm going to speak in front of my peers, usually specifically, it causes me a lot of stress. And I've gotten much better at it in my career as a fitness manager. And say now I'm every week speaking in front of 10 different trainers, and I've done public speaking in front of the company now. One of the things that I do is I take prompts and I visualize talking about them. And that was a visualization thing that made my public speaking much better, because you can't just read off something and that always looks funny. But I'm a better talker anyway. So then what started as like kind of a statement, and then I would say the statement, and then that would kind of prompt what I was going to talk about, when now it's most of the time it's words, and I go off the words. But what I'll do is I'll use that reference as the visualization before I actually do the public speaking. And that's a visualization that's been really useful for me. And I think visualization is such a good tool that not a lot of people are capitalizing on.
Yeah, I think it is. It really is a hack. Like, it is an incredibly easy to use and powerful tool. And so I was glad to see that Doty used it here too. All right. So going on to then step 3 of the 6-step framework for manifesting, Doty talks about the importance of removing obstacles. That's step 3. So it's about looking at what are some of the self-limiting beliefs and perhaps negative self-talk that get in the way of you fully believing in and manifesting the new reality that you're seeking to have be part of your life. In terms of particular practices for this one, he talks about the importance of self-compassion and self-acceptance. So again, step 3 is another one we could take a deep dive on, and so we'll pick and choose where we're going to dive. I think as a therapist, I will say I deal with a lot of I shouldn't say I work with a lot of people who are working through identifying and understanding what are their self-limiting beliefs and what is their negative self-talk. Like, what do they actually say to themselves? Where does that come from? You and I dove into this a little bit when we went through Brené Brown's The Power of Vulnerability, because she talked a lot about the shame gremlins and the shame armor that we wear that's intended to protect us from experiencing shame. And I think if somebody is listening to this and is not sure where to start on kind of understanding their own self-limiting beliefs or negative self-talk, The Power of Vulnerability is probably a good one to begin with, because it will absolutely dig up the worms that are hiding underneath the rocks of your psyche. And I will say too that this isn't necessarily something that everybody can do by themselves. Like, if your internal self-talk or your self-limiting beliefs are really troublesome and you have difficulty working through them, then talk to a therapist about it, because this is something that we deal with in therapy all of the time. Having said that, though, you don't necessarily need to have a therapist if you're kind of good at doing that self-excavating. If you have like a good journaling practice, if you're willing to go and read other books like The Power of Vulnerability, then I think you can expose what a lot of your self-limiting beliefs might be. Clues to look for would be in things like, look for how you talk to yourself when you're under stress. If you call yourself names, if you say, "Oh, I'm so stupid," every time you make a mistake, there's been an underlying belief or some kind of internalized story you might be telling yourself, is a good clue. Or if you find yourself experiencing imposter syndrome, which I know has become incredibly commonplace these days, but often people experience imposter syndrome because there's some part of them that believes they don't belong or they don't fit in the place where they currently are. They're not deserving of the success that they currently have. And so those are some of the things that you can look for. The way they get in the way is this idea in manifesting is that, one, from that neuroscience perspective, feeling like a fraud, feeling inauthentic, feeling like you don't deserve good things, or talking to yourself negatively is going to put you back into that sympathetic state. So you're going to be back into that activated nervous system state, and you're going to be acting from a place of fear rather than a place of love. And this is where the science of it gets a little bit wishy-washy for me, because I'm not sure how that necessarily correlates to bad manifesting or ineffective manifesting. And yet it seems to be a common principle. And I think that it is, as a therapist, it's worth unearthing these things. I think part of it is because that then when we try and do that visualization, part of what we're visualizing is the identity of the person who, has the mansion or has the success or has the whatever. And if as you're visualizing it, you don't see yourself as authentically being that person, then it means you don't actually believe that it's possible for you. I think it's going to limit how you see your own possibilities, and kind of what opportunities you might see as possible for you. I also know, and I love that he made the connection to the self-compassion as well, because there's a very interesting research coming out of the research practice of Dr. Kristen Neff. She has a whole book that's about self-compassion that actually looks at how things like success and mental toughness are actually better supported through self-compassionate practices. That people who are mentally tough and who succeed more are people who are willing to take risks, because they know that risk is necessary for success. Sometimes we need to push our comfort zones. We need to do things we've not done before. We need to, you can't play it safe all of the time. And that when people take risks and don't succeed, and then on the backside of it are met with a uncompassionate response from themselves, so they beat themselves up for making a mistake or not succeeding, they actually punish themselves then for having tried. It makes them less likely to be willing to try again in future. And so this is where like self-compassion seems like one of those really like, oh, let's eat granola and hold hands, everybody, like kind of things. But it's not. It's actually about like, if you want to be tough as nails, if you want to be willing to try and to fail and to look like a fool, but because you are on a mission to succeed, you need to take risks. Self-compassion is absolutely the way to do it, to be self-compassionate about the fact that you are human and all of us make mistakes and none of us is perfect, and that being a beginner and looking foolish and being cringy is just like a part of the process to get to success. And so if you meet yourself with a lack of compassion in those moments, you're going to be less willing to take the kinds of positive risks that will be necessary to manifest likely what it is you're looking to achieve in your life. And so I'm going to throw it over to you, Nate, to ask you about what have you noticed about that connection, either with the self-compassion piece or around that kind of self-limiting beliefs and negative self-talk. What have you noticed that's either come up for yourself or that you've noticed with your coaching clients or amongst like trainers and the people that you train?
Yeah, so this is really interesting because this is actually something I've learned is a core to my profession that a lot of people don't think about, like where I've been coaching people for over a decade now. And the box you put yourself in is the creative play that you exist in. And what's really interesting, I think I like this one with removing the obstacle. The obstacle is what you think is possible. It's like if you live in this little box and all your thinking will relate into that box. It's funny, this goes into so many things, but like we said, it's like we could do a deep dive. One I think I want to go into is learned helplessness. Learned helplessness is something we've addressed quite a bit. Learned helplessness is an obstacle to manifesting, because if you don't believe you have agency in your life, you're not going to do anything positively other than what exists inside of what you believe you have agency over. So learned helplessness is something I dealt a lot with my parents, and my parents struggled with mental illnesses, and I had a very interesting upbringing, but I saw learned helplessness very early. I'll describe this as an obstacle very quickly. Is they've done research on people, but one that really illustrates for me is one of the ones that comes out, do hard things. I think if you're struggling with moving towards goals that you have, do hard things is a really good one. But this is they had two groups of dogs. One group of dogs, they put them in a box that would shock them, but the box had a roof on it. And then but they taught them that they could press this button to get out of the box. And group two, they did not teach that. They were just in the box getting shocked. That's it. They then took these same dogs and they put them into two new boxes without a roof on them. So they both had access to leave the box. They started shocking them. Group one, who was taught to press a button, learned they had agency in this obstacle. They jumped out of the box. Dogs two, who were not taught agency in that obstacle, they shocked, they didn't jump out of the box. They just continued to whine and get shocked. And they learned that they were helpless in this scenario, and that this stressor was just by design. It was what they had to exist in. And they've seen this play out to humans. I think this is very interesting because you're going to have a lot of trouble with this if you don't believe you have any agency in the obstacle or in relation to the goal that you'd like to achieve in life. And so if you think like it plays out, what I see a lot of it is related to trainers if they believe they can be successful in the career, and I see it with clients in if they believe they can be successful in the change of their fitness qualities. So it's like big boned, that's learned helplessness. human bandwidth of skeleton size is not up for debate. Like, oh, we got the same bones. Now, where it moves into the other one, coaching or trainers, is just that, like, this every trainer I've ever worked with, and I've worked with a lot to create successful careers now, the commonality of all of them is that they have some self-doubts on if they can make a successful career here. And that's where it goes into, after learned helplessness, a lot of times you get that network from your parents and your friends and your friend group. So for me, I grew up in a small town, and everybody stayed or they came back. It was that's what they did. Everybody worked at the mill or they worked at the mine, and that was it. And it's like, that's life. And we're going to stay in this little box. And anytime you said anything different, it's like the analogy with the crabs. I don't know if you ever heard of that.
Yes.
The crabs, if you put them all in a bucket, the ones that try to get out of the buckets, the other crabs pull them in. This is how humans work. Humans also look at other people and put them in the same box that they view the world. So sometimes you can get these negative frameworks from your parents, your friend group in high school. You can get it played in all things, but this is a massive obstacle. If you don't even believe you have agency or you could be successful in a given task, you're not getting anywhere towards it. And so with addressing these limiting beliefs, I think is a really important thing in this framework. And I really like it because it's almost like it opens up your creative freedom. So if you imagine a limiting belief and you can imagine what it would be like to not have that belief. Okay, I would love to just be jacked. Okay, and what does jacked look like for me? Okay, say I imagine abs, I imagine some quads, some arms, but I don't have to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. Let's say I just have a modest physical goal, and I don't even believe that's possible. But let's use this framework. Let's say we've imagined the intention and why. We'd feel more confident in life. We'd live life more free. We'd maybe feel more free into our sexual relationships or our partner relationships, more confidence in life, whatever it is. And we want to achieve that physical goal. And then now we embed the intention. We go through, we clarify the desires. We reclaim our power. We clarify the desires. And then removing if we even believe that's possible is a pretty good one. And then learned helplessness is a big thing. And trying to hop out of the box that was put over you at some point. And then where I think for me, the practice self-compassion acceptance comes in, it really bleeds into mental toughness. And then I'm going to touch on ego-orientated goal intentions. So one of the things we see a lot in our society, a lot of people conceive training and their physical capabilities from early sport orientations. And that's because a lot of us do not start in a weight room when we're 6. Most people have their first interactions with training with some related sports things. And in our culture, in North America, specifically say United States and Canada, we're praised a lot for outcomes. So did you make this basket? Did you win the game? Did you make this play? And this comes from, this goes into some history stuff, but it comes from other narratives. But so a lot of people are created only goal orientations around completing the task. Like, so just what it's like to complete it. And then a lot of times it happens is people get used to the coaching being related to themselves in attaining the goal. And then so what you start to get is people who have goals that are just in relation to them achieving the goal start to create more of an ego orientation around that goal. And one of the things when people have ego orientated goals, when they don't want to be perceived struggling. And then so when they take on tasks that are hard, they disengage. And this is a specific obstacle because a lot of people I see this play out in a lot of people with their training goals. A lot of people in our culture have ego-oriented goals around training. And so their only goal, it's not a mastery goal. So it's not that I want to master barbells. I want to master the gym. I want to master training principles. I don't want to be good at the task that would then lead to the physical goal. It's just simply, I want to be jacked and or be less overweight or be whatever it is. And it's just related to themselves accomplishing the goal. And there's no
Right.
mastery orientation. And these are two boxes that I see a lot of people living in from my professional experience, is that they have learned helplessness and then they have ego-orientated goals. And if you have your learned helplessness, you're just not even going to think you could do it. You don't even think you have any agency. And if you have ego orientations around goals, then when you face hard things, you disengage, and surprise, every goal is going to be hard. And so if you create
Yeah.
more of a mastery related goal, then you're going to be more successful. That's
Yeah.
my major experience. There's other topics, but those are two big ones I see really that are obstacles that need to be removed. You got to believe you can achieve it. And then you want to create mastery orientated goals that are mastering the process in relation to what you'd like to achieve.
Yeah. I think that those are two huge ones, both the learned helplessness and the ego-oriented goals in terms of, I think it circles back to kind of number 2, clarifying your desires, right? Because it's about figuring out like, okay, you want to get jacked and look like Chris Bumstead. Why? You're not going to be him. You might look like him, but you won't be him. So what is it that you think looking like him is going to get you, right? Figuring out that why, because if it's really just I want to look like him or nothing, then, and there, like you say, there's no process oriented goals or desire for mastery, then any little challenge is going to interrupt that person's motivation, especially in the face of hardship, right? I think a third one that I thought of while you were talking is, and I want to give a shout out to my former professor, Dr. Rory Coughlin, for teaching me this concept. He was a social psychologist, and he taught me about this concept of the horizon of possibility, that humans, I know I've mentioned this as you and I have talked casually, but I don't know if I've mentioned it on the podcast before. But our ability to visualize and imagine things is actually really limited. We are limited by what we have had experience of before. So either direct experience ourselves, or what we have observed other people, peers, or other people like in our family or close social groups doing and succeeding. And so one of the things that can be a self-limiting belief is actually just if you have this limited horizon of possibility, which is that your imagination of what's possible for you is limited, because if you have grown up in disadvantage, then you may have a limited horizon in terms of options that you see as being available to you. And I only mention that because I think if anybody listening to this is somebody who struggles with the visualizing something because the options they see as available to them feels small and limited and uninspiring, then I would say, okay, that might be possible. Another way then that we can expand our horizon of possibilities is by seeing representations of people like ourselves elsewhere in the media. I think this is why representation in media is important, but it's also why looking at a diversity of media, or even reading books, right? And reading about different characters who are living different kinds of lives than the ones that are from the small town where you grew up. My town wasn't as small as yours, Nate, but we talked coming from the town that I did, I was one of the few people that got out, and we talk about it. It's almost like it had a gravity well of just sucking people back into it, or people never reaching escape velocity to get out of it in the first place. And I really do think that it was about, just reading about different people living different kinds of lives. So whether that's in fiction or reading other biographies, and just seeing other possibilities than the ones that were necessarily role modeled for you growing up, I think is a really important part of not limiting yourself in terms of what might be possible for you. So let's move on to number 4 then, Nate. Tell us about the next step.
Yeah, I think, oh man, removing obstacles, that's a big one. It's almost like, for me, it's one of these base to the pyramid type thinking
It is.
And it goes into our self-belief, and there's so much on there. They give one last nugget that you got to address your
Yeah, please.
self-efficacy. Is like you have to believe you can be successful, and then if you just prepare and you get skills in a related task, you'll then start to gain confidence. If you have
Yeah,
self-efficacy and you have preparation in a task, you're going to be more confident. And so you have to address that self-belief. It's such an important thing. So now if we
absolutely.
go on to step 4 in his process is embedding the intention. And I think this is a really big step. So he goes into multi-sensory encoding. So that's crossing different networks of our brain and body. So it's like, say, the things we hear, the things we see, the things we say, the things we can say to ourselves, the things we hear out loud, crossing these different networks. And he talks about specifically, when I referenced, is writing, reading aloud, and visualizing.
Mhm.
So say if we create a thing that we've gone through these steps, and then now we write down this task, and we've removed the barriers, we've clarified it aligns with our value, we believe we could be successful in it, and so then now we have this outcome we'd like to achieve. And so writing it down, reading it aloud, visualizing it. So he goes through these drills and all the steps of how to basically do a sort of mindfulness meditation manifesting practice that I think is really positive, and you guys can go take a look at it. But I think the multisensory encoding is really, really interesting because it goes into sort of what is salient in our brain. And then
Mm.
this crossovers, I'm going to let him talk about the specific neuroscience, but I think this principle remains true for me and relates to some of my education, is the way we look at thinking and acting. And we have a basic principle called the information processing system. And so we've done a lot of research on humans, and we cannot multitask. So there is something that comes in, and we orchestrate a task, a thought, an action, and then it comes out. And I'm not going to quote the specific numbers, but they've proved and how much time it takes for some of these actions to play out. So then, imagine we take the most obvious thing, like a ball moving towards us, and we see the ball, and then we process how fast it's moving, it's coming. We've decided we're going to grab the ball, and so we grab the ball. So if we cross over that we can't multitask, but we learn to group things together in one action. So think about driving a car. And then so you first learn to, let's say, standard. You drive into first, you drive into second. You learn how to put these tasks into one by one encoding. And then you learn to encode the entire task, but not only the entire task, but all the different things that could play into that task. We start learning and we getting better, and this goes into the skill of things. What I really like about this multi-sensory encoding is it takes that finite amount of landscape of something that's in our perceptual awareness, is something we can actually focus on, and then we put it into a task that we have to, say, visualize, say, and then write down, and crossing over different sensory inputs, and then repeating it regularly. So
Mhm.
what fires together wires together. And this is a principle that I talk a lot about. Atomic Habits is a really good book for this. I highly recommend that one. And what fires together gets wired together. So this
Yeah.
crosses over all three of these frameworks. Is one of the examples I've used is the snowy hill, because obviously we've learned that I grew up in a small town. It was in northern BC, so there's snow. And so we imagine that we've gone down a path and we've beaten it down. We've gone down a bunch of times, and now that sliding hill has gotten really, really, really quick. And that's our neuro foundation on a given task. So something that a habit or a skill. And then so let's just take it into something like actually I'm going to side quest because I don't want to go too much into that. And then so if we imagine that we've encoded this intention, and then we've put it into our brain through multisensory experiences over and over again, our brain is going to start to prioritize this task, and it's going to become salient in our brain. So then now it's something that our brain deems valuable to use that finite landscape on. And then, so then if we do this regularly, we put ourselves in a place to subconsciously prioritize this task. And I'll let you go into the book to get more details on that. This was something that was really interesting to me because it crosses over so many different themes of my previous understanding about how to achieve goals.
Yeah.
And just the idea of using this finite landscape for me on our intentional awareness and then hacking our brain to prioritize it is basically what for me is the whole point, or what is a large picture on what the manifestation is. And for me, it's like, we talked a lot about your preconceived notions of manifesting. For me, this is manifesting because it's like I didn't have any other preconceived notions of it. Do you have anything that stood out to you right away with embedding the intention?
Yeah, it actually connected back to one thing that I know from psychology and then another one from part of therapy practice. I'll start with the therapy one first. This idea of one of the practices that he talks about is visualizing kind of whatever the desired future state is, then writing it down and writing it down with as much detail as possible. He specifically talks about like you want to write down not just that, say, like, I've decided I want to be the next Tony Robbins. So it's not just that I write down that I am a great public speaker, but that I am a great public speaker who sells out auditoriums, and write down, like imagine speaking at one of these talks. What are you wearing? What does it look like? What does being in the stadium smell like? What does the sound of the crowd feel like? What does it feel like to stand there with the thousands of people around you? And to write and describe that in as much detail as possible. And then what he does is he gets you to read it back. One is to read it back in the first person as you've written it. So like, I did this, I did that, I notice this sound, the other sound. But then to then read it back to yourself in the third person. So Petrina did this, Petrina did that. Petrina stood on the stage in the auditorium, blah, blah, blah. And that is something that it's a technique that's sometimes used in some types of narrative reprocessing where it's like embedding the story. When you do it as you're embedding it kind of like as though it's a memory, even though it's a visualization. It's not something you've done, but you're encoding it as though it's a memory. When you put it in the third person, you're encoding it as a story. It's a story of a person that is sometimes, it can be motivating. It can help us sometimes just detach from the story a little bit and observe it, be inspired by it. And I just noticed the technique that he describes is similar to one that I have seen used in some narrative processes. And so I think there is something to that in terms of how our brain encodes this message. Like you say, the purpose of this step is to embed the intention, to start getting our brain to pay attention to this, the things that we're imagining, the things we're visualizing. These are things that are important to us. We want to pay attention to them. That connects to then the psychology principle, which I learned, which is that our brains can be primed to pay attention for certain things. In psychology experiments, they have done things like they have primed people by showing them pictures of things that are disgusting, like rotten food or like things covered in maggots, that kind of thing. So they've showed them these gross pictures. And then they showed them pictures of people's faces, and that the people in the experiment had to describe what is the facial expression that this person is making. And when they had been primed with these disgusting images, they were more likely to see, to perceive negative expressions or expressions of disgust on the faces of the people around them, even when that's not necessarily the emotion that was being portrayed on the face. And it can be vice versa as well. So it's whatever we're exposing ourselves to is priming us to pay more attention to that inner environment. Just like, say, for example, if you decided that you wanted to buy a car and you decided that, you know what, I'm going to get myself that Escalade. That's the one I'm in the market for, is an Escalade. When you go out into the world, then suddenly you see those freaking Escalades everywhere, right? It's parked next to you in the parking lot, and you're stuck behind one in traffic, and you notice one like for sale on somebody selling one used on a side street. Suddenly you see them everywhere. They were there all along. You just weren't paying attention to it before. Now it's become salient. It's become important to you. You've told your brain it's worth paying attention to, and so now you're noticing it more. And so I just think the more you can really flesh out that visualization of what it is that you are trying to manifest in your life, it's a way of telling your brain to start like, pay attention to this stuff, look for opportunities for this. And that's where then you start to have these magical serendipitous experiences where suddenly you are meeting more people who are interested in those same things that you are, or people who can give you access to opportunities, or you're suddenly like, you're standing in line and you like at the Shoppers Drug Mart, they have like a little book section. So say you're standing in line at Shoppers Drug Mart, you look over at the books and it's like, oh, there's a book that's on the topic that I am interested in, right? You suddenly start noticing things that are related to the thing you're trying to manifest, but it's just because you've primed your brain to pay attention to those things. And it's just a really effective strategy. It can sometimes, I think, be a little bit hard to get into the nitty-gritty of priming our brains with the right things.
Yeah, I think I formulated where my original statement was on, is that it goes into, I think embedding the intention is really interesting, because for me it touches on inattentional unawareness. And so this is a thing you could do for yourself. Now I'm going to ruin it for you, but if you actually really do it, is they've done a lot of research on this, that you only see what you're paying attention to and what you're focused on. So say we have 1 million bits of information happening per second. Imagine everything that's going on in our body, like our heart's beating, our respiration's happening, digestion is in the background. Like there's so much going on in our brain, what we hear, what we see, there's so much going on. There's a lot of information coming in. And say we take 1 million bits of information in, and we can only pay attention to, say, 10,000 bits of that information. So then for embedding the intention, for me, it touches on the inattentional awareness. So they've done these studies on this where they show you a video and there's a bunch of people dribbling a basketball and there's people passing it. And they tell you to count how many, say, bounce passes happen and how many chest passes happen. So one that's bouncing and one that's not. And I actually got by the first time this happened. Is you're focusing on it, you're trying to count the passes, and then what happens is a guy in a monkey suit walks through, and 50% of people don't see the monkey. And it happened to me. They played it back and they ask you, like, did you notice anything in that? And you're going, there was this many passes, whatever. And then they play it back. This time, I want you to just watch for a guy in a monkey suit, and the guy and you see him walk, and you go, oh my God, how did we not notice that? So there's a lot going on in our sensory experience, and we can only pay attention to a finite amount of it. So he touches on the default mode network, the central executive network, the salience network, and the attention network. So all these play into how the neuroscience of the things that are in our intentional awareness. And a salience, if that's not something you've come to an understanding, is a priority, a thought that has priority. And so with embedding the intention, if we cross over these different sensory encodings, like say writing it, you have to interpret the language and then put it into physical form. Reading it aloud, you've now had to verbalize it and then hear it. And then where we visualize it, then now we're creating a internal experience in relation to that thought. And we do it over and over again. Now we're going to hack the system, and then we have this thing that our brain deems like a priority, and then now all the other tasks that could theorize break that attention become less important. And then now you've got an intention that's embedded and is consistently being prioritized and made aware, and then touched on the things that you talked about, like being in the book stand, you're talking about it, you're meeting people that also do it, resources happen. And this is funny, this is sort of what my preconceived notions of manifesting were. It's almost like in my mind, the first time I heard manifesting, this is what I imagined. It's like, oh yeah, you're just like, man, you're praying about that thing, you're talking about it, you're doing things. Of course, you're going to move at least some sort of way towards it. I think is really interesting. And I think the neuroscience of this is now, it's like, it's a misnomer for me now. When I say manifestation, I'm imagining this, and then some other people are imagining whatever else they were thinking of.
Exactly.
Now, do you have anything to touch on that, or should we move to step 5?
No, I think we're ready for step 5. So because they mesh together really well.
Yeah.
So coming into step 5, after we've embedded the intention, so we've trained our brains that this is important, pay attention for this stuff, but then we need to take action. So step 5 is pursuing actively the thing that we want to manifest. So we need to translate those intentions and our visualizations into small, actionable steps. We need to schedule actions, we need to actually follow through, and we need to have an implementation plan of like, what are the steps to get to the thing? And so, for example, if you want to be the next Chris Bumstead, then the first action you're going to need to do is to join a gym, get a gym membership, start go lifting weights. And then there's going to be 1,000 other steps to get to that goal, but it's going to mean taking the first small step towards it. If you want to, say, have your dream career, then it means that you're going to need to figure out, like, what are the qualifications that a person needs to have that dream career? Like the people who currently are in that career, what did they do to get that? And then reverse engineer to where you are right now to figure out your path forward to that. So is it that there's a skill you need to develop? Is it that there's some experience that you need? Is there some knowledge you need to acquire? And how would you get that knowledge? Do you need to take a course? Do you need to get a degree? Do you need to, be self-taught? Do you need to get some learning? That figuring out what are some actionable steps. So it's not just about praying for it or believing it and the universe will send it your way. It's that you actually need to do something with it. And I think the piece here is that it's about those small actionable things. It's not just jumping into the deep end, and not that manifesting needs to necessarily take a long time or be really methodical, but it is about actions that have a clear connection to whatever it is, the outcome that you're looking for. And I think this is where then it doesn't just come back to, the previous step of kind of looking at our really fleshed out visualization of what it is we're trying to achieve, but it comes all the way back to point number 1, which is, or I guess number 2, which is that it's about clarifying what your desires are, figuring out what is it that I actually want. Because as we pursue actively the thing we want to manifest, it may be that I visualized as Dr. Doty did. Maybe he thought he was going to be a doctor and he was going to have a Cape Cod style mansion overlooking the bay and he was going to have a Ferrari. That was his dream. And he got all those things, and then his life fell apart and he realized it was all hollow and empty, that it didn't actually meet the needs that were fundamentally there, which is that when he visualized that home, it was about having financial security and love and belonging and stability. And so I think when we go to pursue things actively, it's also about being really clear on them. What is it that we're pursuing? Because, say, for example, Doty, he decided he wanted to be a doctor. He actually became a neurosurgeon, but he could have equally become a cardiologist. Maybe like he didn't have necessarily a specific part of medicine in mind, or maybe he would have started to pursue, say he took biology courses and he wasn't really good at them, he might have pivoted and gone into law instead, right? There could have been other ways to meet the same financial goals. And so I think some flexibility around when you're really clear on what your values are and what it is that the desired end state is, then being open to the idea that there's actually more than one way to make those dreams happen, allows you to course correct as you go.
Mm.
But that it's this idea that you can't course correct until you have started the journey. Like if you're just sitting at step one, you've got a map planned out for yourself of how you're going to get to your destination, but you just keep revising the map based on weather updates and you never actually just leave and start the journey, then all your course correcting is meaningless until you're actually on the road and actually doing it. What would you
Yeah.
say about that, Nate?
Yeah, I have a couple things on that. I think I'm a reverse engineer some of the stuff from your statement. I
Sure.
really liked he brought up. This makes me think of a specific part of the Jim Carrey story. I don't know if you know the Jim Carrey, or the listeners would know the Jim Carrey story. It's pretty awesome, and definitely say do some digging on it. There's a couple highlights from the Jim Carrey story, but one of them I thought was really interesting was along his journey where he's already written the $1 million check that he's going to get for his acting career. He's at comedy clubs and he's just doing stand-up comedy. And he's just, and I got to remember it specifically. Why did it left my mind. He's at the comedy club and he just keeps asking himself, what do they need? Like, what are they coming here for? What do they need? And he kept trying to clarify it to find out what they needed. So he wasn't just thinking about being a $1 million actor. He was trying to find the specific need of his audience and what the bigger picture for his comedy was. And I can't remember. It was that he started to discover it was basically an escape from concern. And I can't remember exactly what the way he worded it in like his story, but it was that the people came to escape from their concern of life. They came to laugh and not think about that stressor at home, to not think about that given obstacle in their life, that they're to come and they were going to be relieved of concern. And he sort of started to almost have this I don't want to say religious, but almost like this spiritual connection that he was doing a greater good to the world, and that his comedy was servicing the need of his viewers, and that they were becoming having a net positive from his comedy. And I thought that was a really interesting point, because it goes into clarifying the desires just like you did, but it's sort of like a specific action plan as well. It's like, what does my target audience need? Not only that I'm going to be a $1 million actor, but why would they come to see me? Like, what is it that I'm doing that is valuable? And it goes into having a bigger picture. There's a whole bunch of steps that this crosses over on. But I think for me, it goes into one of the two principles that I think contrasts with your previous viewpoint of manifestation is you can't do anything. Like you're not going to be a pro NBA basketball player unless there's some given things, the gifts that you had to attain.
Yeah.
Like not everybody's going to be able to make it to the NBA. And if you look at some of the stats on something, the reason I brought up the NBA because basketball was a dream of mine. Like a lot of people could, but you have to have the necessary foundations of cognitive skill-related tasks and genetic disposition to those, height, and there's lots of things that you can affect. But the principle I'm trying to draw is the NBA is elite, and you have to have some certain elite traits to be even in the category to start moving towards that goal. So you could manifest it all you want, and you just might not get it. But there's also some things in your life that you can have deficits for. You can be born with neurodegenerative stuff. You can be born with cognitive related disabilities. You can be there's so many things that are outside of our control also in the world, but those aren't of concern. So I like two topics that he goes on to is that you're not manifesting everything. Sometimes there's just some things that you're given that you have to deal with, and that you can't attain absolutely anything. And there might be some things that are just exist outside of what's possible. But there's a large degree of things that are possible. And translating a big goal into small pieces and scheduled actions that start to move towards that goal, and implementing intentions, actually taking action on those goals, is the foundation to everything. It's, you got to have a blueprint, and then you have to show up consistently on that blueprint to attain a goal. And if we draw it out quickly, it's something like, a very common goal is to see more visible muscle mass, to be toned, to be leaner, to see abs, to see muscles. That's a very, very common goal. And so it's like, okay, well, one, we have to be in a caloric deficit. This is thermodynamics. We got to be eating less energy than's going out. And then we got to have a specific nutrition plan related to that of intake. And then we got to have a specific training plan to achieve that fitness qualities, whether it's building muscle and all these other things related to it. It's like, we can't just do all these different things and then achieve that. At the very end of the day, we have to have a plan and we have to execute on it. And I think that for what you've sort of the preconceived notion of your manifestation, this is like the breaker of that. This is actually, now we've done all this work to have this very specific, valuable goal. And then we've broken all barriers. Like, we imagine we've reclaimed our power. So then now we've gotten rid of the negative the negative talk. We've clarified the desire. We've removed all limiting beliefs. We've embedded this intention. It's in our very DNA of our intentional awareness. And then now we actually have to hit the rubber has to hit the road. We got to have a plan here, and we got to attack it. I think it's it's the most instrumental part of this whole thing. But what I really like about the whole framework he's got here, the 6 steps of manifestation, really, is I do a lot of goal setting. This is almost a bulletproof way to get to a given outcome, is like, if you follow it, that you've got this goal and it means something to you and it's relatively reasonable. And then, I've never done this extensive network with somebody or this process to get to the given goal. Like, I do a lot, like when I'm doing goal setting with people, I do a lot deeper than most of the time. But this is just such a good framework to do before you actually get to hitting the road on the task, which I think it's like most people might just move to this. It's like, okay, blueprint, habits, let's get to it. It's like none of this previous stuff happened. And I think it's like, if you actually take manifesting out of this and you just look at this like a reasonable attack strategy to achieve a given outcome over time, it's flawless in a way.
Absolutely. And I think like that's what I like about this neuroscience-based version of manifesting, is that he's really reclaimed that word manifesting out of the realm of woo-woo and magic and put it firmly back into like, this is behavior change. What are some things we know about neuroscience for people who have big goals for themselves and want to change some things in their lives? The last piece I will say about this step 5 of pursuing it actively is that it actually connects back to something that I think we read it in James Clear's book, Atomic Habits, but he talks about this idea of when we start taking those actions, it's about you prove to yourself that you are the identity that you have envisioned for yourself through your actions. The actions become the evidence that I am the person I thought I was, that I am I am embodying the identity of the person who has the success that I aspire to. Or who has like the lifestyle or the body or like the level of fitness or the career. What is the identity of that person? And then each of these action steps it also then reinforces the motivation and the system and the goals and the values around it, because it becomes the proof I'm showing with my behavior to my brain, in terms of like reinforcing that salience of like, we are going through with this too. And you're just proving it to yourself over and over again that it is who you are, that you are who you say you are and who you believe yourself to be.
Yeah. Okay. So if we move to step 6, is the roof to the castle or the house is that we're sustaining through service. And so
Mhm.
he talks about aligning goals with purpose and altruism for lasting motivation. Um, I think there's a lot of real good about this because there's a couple different topics that sort of it runs through my brain, but it talks one of them that this makes me think of on a combination of some of the last 5 books, actually, a new sort of understanding that's come to play. For me, one of my earlier thoughts, a little bit of nihilism, almost like that human nature was flawed, and maybe this came from some of my religious parents' background, and maybe viewing, say, humans as sinners and blah blah. We don't need to necessarily go into that, but one of the things that start to become aware to me is actually that human nature, and he touches on it in this book, is caring for other humans. And it goes
Mhm.
in, one of the things he talks about is the mammalian part of our brain and the development when we came to be an animal that has to take care of our young over a long period of time. And then so the very ingrained in our species, which is reproduce and survive, all animals, because whether that's the law of nature, we cease to exist. And it goes that our human nature is developed on taking care of our young over time and taking care of other people. And then so, and we're this goes into some other things, but one of the topics that it makes me think of is brain folds. Is all the most highly developed animals just have more surface area of brains, so there's more surface area for the prefrontal cortex, which is the new brain, you could say, in correlation to our old brain. So I like to put this conceptualization as the lizard brain. You can think of it as the toddler brain with humans too. So like I work in management and I always go, okay, the toddler's here. So how do I deal with this toddler? And it happens all the time. And it's this old brain. It's just this fight or flight. It's very primitive. It's like attack, run, freeze, or I'm good. Like, and it's like you can see it when it comes out in people, and you can. I liked the lizard brain from an early understanding because it just, you could just kind of picture it's this freaking attack, this primitive brain. But I like it now, is since my management or leadership career started, I can just see the toddler, and I can just see when the toddler comes out in some of a crucial conversation per se. And then so this topic is really interesting to me because when you align with sort of altruism or the greater good,
Mhm.
you align with human nature and you put yourself in the process of living a meaningful life in serving something that's greater than yourself. So this goes into some of the philosophy topics, but something I heard relatively recently that I liked was um, that nihilism is the foundation of it is constantly being betrayed by the world, that people who have nihilistic perspectives tend to just adhere with this thought on constantly being betrayed by the world. Um, and that enlightenment connects to constantly being reborn. And it's an interesting topic when I think about it. I imagine somebody who thinks they've constantly being betrayed by the world, so nothing matters and there's no reason for anything, and that my behavior doesn't matter, what I do, I'm constantly being betrayed by the world's bad. Versus sort of this, whatever you think about enlightenment, but this topic of being constantly reborn, and that you've constantly had this suffering and you've came out as something different who understands a broader perspective. And I think there's only one of those that's a good outcome, is that it goes, this is a tattoo I had created for me, but this isn't just a snake fighting a bird. This is a core part of my philosophy. This is, for me, the law of nature is related to survival. That the law of nature relates to, you could say, there's the law of nature is why am I forgetting this word? We've been talking for too long. is
If you want to
basic.
look it
It's
up, I'll
oh,
clip it in.
there you go. I got it. I got it.
Okay.
The law. No. The listeners can follow along this journey. The law of nature is entropy. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, and then so the nature of the world is expansion and compression. Is yin and yang. It's life and death. It's that all things come to an end. And I think aligning with altruism or a greater good in just your viewpoints start to align with the real nature of human beings is that we, in the law of nature, is that we need to fight for survival and we need to protect our young and others in our community. And if you start to align with those viewpoints, you start to align with what the laws of nature are, and you're going to be in less friction with the universe. And I think you put yourself in a place to live a more meaningful life that is part of a bigger picture. Because then when you're suffering for that greater good. When you're successful, you have a group to share it with. And I think for me, sustaining through service was a big change in my life. And I can see it in relation to my task and people in my field and my peers, is that I have a more serviced viewpoint of what fitness means to me. I could sum this up pretty fast, is that I've been into training points in my life where I've actually thought I could die. And we've drawn up this story before where that was motivation. That was just like, if I really pushed myself until I fucking died, how much longer could I go? How much more of a deficit could I get into? How much leaner could I go? How much further could I push my body? All in the pursuit of being the biggest and leanest.
Yeah.
It's a funny perspective, but it really narrows down to a specific point of view that I was willing to sacrifice anything for a given outcome physically. Like I had this physical goal I wanted to achieve, and I was willing to almost sacrifice anything for it. But also, my mom died long before she should have because she struggled with obesity her whole life, and she was
Mhm.
in a box of her own belief and never took care of herself mentally or physically. She was also given some hard curveballs herself. But I saw what the very extreme of physical inactivity could do to somebody. Somebody in pain, immobile, and unable to live a high quality of life because of the choices they made in relation to taking care of themselves physically and mentally. And so for me, my picture started to change. Is my goals with people and myself is not to be the biggest and leanest. My goal is to help people create the most meaningful life they could, and that whatever task that my viewpoint has started to change more into this sort of life coaching aspect that is more looking at somebody's mental capabilities, their emotional capabilities, and their physical capabilities, which is something me and you have discussed in this framework of thinking. And then there's almost this fourth thing that started to come into existence, which is spiritual existence. We can talk about that on the
Okay.
road. But one of my viewpoints started to change probably about 8 years ago, was starting to look at the act of service and how could I be the best possible coach for all the people that came into my wheelhouse. And then now I coach clients and people in fitness goals, but then I also coach trainers and new careers and how to be other coaches and fitness mentors in other people's lives. And man, watching a trainer become successful when they didn't think they could have, or some of the experiences I've had with you in watching you become something that, I would have loved to have seen my mom become, is so much more meaningful than getting on stage. Like, it's just like,
Yeah.
it's not even in the same question. That was a long bait to get to that, but it's like, it's not even the same question. It's not even the
Yeah.
same question. And so if you start to create a goal and moving towards service, and you start to look more at life that humans are actually good and desire to help people, and you view yourself in the world as, say, constantly being reborn and becoming anew, you're just going to put yourself in a real good place to, say, have a continued motivation over time versus like you getting on stage only goes so far. Like, yeah, okay, it's something, but there's more to it. Now, so for you, on sustaining through service, aligning goals with purpose and altruism for lasting motivation, what are your thoughts?
Let me just reflect that I love that you have such clarity about your mission, Nate, and that this part really resonated with you, because I think that yeah, it's one of the things I really appreciate about you is just how much you are motivated by a genuine and sincere desire to help other people. It's part of what makes you who you are. So, in terms of this principle, I think that there really is something to it in terms of kind of where you concluded, which is that we are all capable of manifesting a whole lot of different things. Probably not everything, because, if you're a 52-year-old lady who's 5'5", you are not getting into the NBA at this stage. Like, it's not happening. But within reason, within the realm of possibility, you can manifest virtually anything that you put your mind to. And a lot of those things are going to be hollow and empty and are not going to give you the sense of fulfillment. And so I think that the purpose of this last step in the framework, I believe, is about Dr. Doty trying to maybe help his listeners not make the same mistakes that he did in terms of manifesting something that turned out to be very hollow in the end. And having said that, even looking at his story, I don't think he would even say that that journey was wasted time. It absolutely wasn't. It was one of those unlearnable lessons. He couldn't have learned it had he not gone down that path and become the man that he did. That's how he learned that doing it for your own self-serving reasons is going to be hollow. I think this is the one step that probably has the least connection to neuroscience, other than the part that you pointed out, that part of our brains is hardwired to focus on community and care for our immediate communities, that the strength of humans as a species is actually in our social community and networks, not because we are individually strong and tough, but because we in community are undefeated. And I think that when we align ourselves with that, however we define our community, right? However we define our purpose and how we see ourselves as being capable of being of service to our communities, I think it's really important. I think it is certainly something that has been an important piece of that, again, step 2, clarifying the goals, having manifested things that I did not bring me happiness, both a career and a whole first marriage and relationship, because it was no offense to my first husband, he is a decent human. It's just that, I was a stage of life where we both made this mistake, not just me. We thought we were supposed to get married. We were an age where all our friends were getting married, and this is what you were supposed to do, and just kind of stumbled into one another for a whole variety of reasons. But again, then I thought that's what I was supposed to do. I thought that's developmentally the trajectory my life was supposed to take. And then my husband and I one day are both looking at each other going who are we and how have we ended up here? And so I think, really clarifying for yourself about what are the gifts that you have to bring to the world, and how can you being your best self, how does that contribute to other people directly or indirectly? It doesn't need to be direct, right? So for example, 2 people, there's a reason this comes to mind and I'll explain in a sec, but say, for example, 2 people going into psychology, one might become a clinical psychologist who does therapy with people, and another person might become a researcher who does research on treatments to support people who struggle with mental illness. One is working directly with people, the other one's not working directly with people. Both of them are trying to improve the lot of humanity, right? The reason that particular example comes to mind for me is because when I was going through my undergrad in psychology, I was involved in all the things. I was the president of the student committee. I was on the faculty advisory committee for the department. I was working in a research lab and like knew all of the professors. And so anyway, had gone to this conference where we were presenting some research, and that evening there was like this mixer where we were all there like having drinks. It was my first real social occasion with the profs.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the profs with a glass of wine in his hand. There were two of them standing there, one glass of wine in his hand, said like, so what are you planning to do when you like go into your master's? What kind of research are you interested in doing? And I said, actually I'm interested in going into occupational therapy. I was like, I want to get into a rehabilitation science and work with people and blah, blah.
Work with humans.
And he looked at me, work with humans. And he kind of looked at me with like this red flush from his glass of wine and just was like, oh, so you want to help people, and rolled his eyes so hard I thought he was going to strain them. And then I just kind of chuckled, and the two profs kind of chuckling about it. I was like, oh, this naive girl wants to go help people. And I'm like, sir, I was your age, Nate. So like I'm in my early 30s at this stage. And I'm like, yes, I want to help people.
Isn't
like,
that the point?
Isn't that the point? Like, it was just so wild to me. So I think like, to me, I think both you and I got raised in homes where this idea of service was, and being of service was a value that both of us got taught. I think not everybody necessarily gets taught that value, so it might not be core to some people. And still, I would suggest that if somebody listening to this doesn't necessarily resonate with this idea of being of service to others, I would still think about like, then get really clear on your why. Like if you want to have money, if you want to have power, if you want to have fame, if you want to have success, why do you want it? Because it probably has to do with people, whether it's about having love or respect or relationships that you're seeking. It has to do with other people, because you can have all the success in the world, but if you have nobody to enjoy it with, then you have not a lot to comfort you.
And if you're a sociopath and they're psychopath, maybe I'm sorry, this isn't the place. I guess
we're not for you.
Well, but it's funny because it's funny that you say that, because I've had the almost the same experience. Not
Really?
So like that might be an altercation with me. That might contradict so bad that I'm getting into a verbal altercation with somebody. That's like disrespectful.
It was out of pocket. Yeah.
That's out of pocket. Yeah. But I had like kind of a similar thing where I was kind of deciding here. So it's funny. It's like lots of people look at kin like just like a door, and then it's like, and kin in application is a weapon.
Yeah.
Like a human with just a good understanding of history and sociology related to physical activity, and then good anatomy and physiology and training principles with psychology in there, that's a weapon. If that person just constantly experimented and works coaching people, like kin is a really good coach, and I really see it in all types of things. But I went into kin to be a better coach.
Yeah.
That's why I went into kin. There was a lot of people in kin who didn't share the same goal. But there was a lot of people in kin who had no fucking idea what they were talking about and could do good in a test, but had no understanding of how to actually put in training principles. Yeah. And I started to come to the same conclusion here. But for me, this started to go into theory and application. So what I've learned with trainers is that people can push their way through application and still become a pretty good professional on something like training. There's deeper levels of things that you couldn't. Maybe the right type of person, I don't know. But there's like lots of ways to get information. And if you're getting the information, you're applying it to people, getting into you're doing your own science, and you can get very good at it. But you have to do that extra work. When you just have theory, you start to get further away from the application. And there's no theory that doesn't get applied that makes any sense. And so I saw two types of things. Is you'd see somebody go so far on the theory end that they started just breaking from reality, and what they're studying is gone so far off the spectrum. Now that's valuable to push the industry, but it doesn't really help the people who are struggling with a given topic. And you need those people to push the industry. and it's its own level of application. That's a high performer. That's a genius. Like that's like somebody who need. What you get on the other side is a bunch of people who have perceived confidence in a task they're novel in, and
Yeah.
they're overconfident and don't have any understanding on actual application, because they have these theories but they never applied. Like it's like, say something like if you start getting into the energy systems, like, okay, just understanding the Krebs cycle is okay, cool. But then understanding how to actually apply anaerobic and aerobic training principles and sort of power and capacity to make human beings fitter for a given task, that's cool. That's like, you can do a little science on it. You can look at the research, then you can take this theory and apply it, and then you become a better professional. And so for me, I saw this happen. I saw peers that, I wouldn't say idiots. They were so far off applying it. 4 years of research without ever being in the gym is not a good foundation, because now you're almost overconfident and ignorant, and you're not willing to do the early steps to get to where you want to go. And this happens in lots of tasks, but input Dunning-Kruger effect and thinking you know more than you do. But then I saw the high performer, and I said, I don't want that. Like, oh
Yeah.
my God. There was like, there's one specific person, I'm not going to, but it's the same type of thing. So it was, I took this anatomy class, Kin 400. It was the coolest course I've ever taken. I don't know if I'll ever, like, that was cool. And so I dissected a human being. And the anatomy understanding I got from that course was absolutely nuts. And I
Yeah.
see the misapplied anatomy all over the place, because the real thing and the physics of the real thing in relation to structure and function is not a surface level, and there's deeper underlying principles. So that's given me an anatomy weapon that helps train people in the right way very, very effectively. And I had a conversation with this professor after class, and it was just very, very clear to me that he didn't want anything to do with teaching, and teaching was a conduit to push his research. And the only thing there was to prove this given obscure anatomy principle to himself, and maybe self-validate his own ego in relation to super competence in a given endeavor. And I did not like that. It so far didn't align with me. I remember thinking about it. I said, whoa. And it made me totally rethink everything. And so when I left my kin degree, I said I wanted, like, I'd been working with people the whole time. I'd been a trainer all through my kin degree. But I said I want to get out into the field and work with people. But same type of story. I don't know. I just wager that person didn't have a lot of meaning in his life, and some of his work just started to self-perpetuate underlying insecurities that were never dealt with. And now you need some people pushing the industry, but I still argue you can still have some your motivation to push the industry and the greater good, or motivation to boast one's ego. It's like
Right?
I reckon that still the altruism in relation to this high performer who doesn't care about helping people but cares about pushing the industry is still more valuable. So it's almost on any perspective, just aligning with some greater principle is to go live a life of more meaning, but just have some more sustained motivation over time. Because whenever you just have a task, well, then now you achieve the task, what next?
Yeah.
Or you don't achieve the task and you're just a failure.
Well,
Even worse.
Even worse, particularly if that thing is your career, right? If it's, you are going to evaluate your whole work life, your whole career life, based on whether or not you reach peak ego satisfaction during your career's lifetime, and then what, your whole life was wasted? Like, is that how you're going to sit in your rocking chair when you're 80 and look back at your life as? That seems wild to me. So I think, yeah, this idea of sustaining through service is a really great way to make sure that you're not going to fall into some of those ego pitfalls and end up manifesting something that on the surface looks really glossy, but inside is very hollow and unsatisfying.
Well, I think it's interesting because if you got anything, it's like the there's the dopamine argument that we're just a thing that pursues, remotivates, pursues, and just cycles through that. It's like you've I don't know if you've heard some of the negative arguments about human nature in relation to this task. A lot of times you see it when people arguing capitalism is very very bad, because it's arguing that if sort of money is the sole thing and we just are going to consistently just pursue more money and more profits, and that's our human nature, and that's a whole different topic. But what I think is interesting is it's just totally devoid of reality, because it's like, okay, that's one network. And it's like, what I like about this is facts are we only have more brain folds because of our complex communication with our species. So it's like at the very bare minimum, aligning with our DNA is aligning with a task that involves other human beings or some sort of community network. And so whatever it is that your goal is, having some orientation that aligns with some sort of service or some greater good is just aligning with what I think is nature, but just going to put yourself in a sort of unlosable state, because it's this greater good. And if your goal is to help other people, every one of those sufferings you had is turning you into a better thing to serve others who've experienced that suffering. And when you suffer, you become aware of your own ignorance on a given thing. And it plays into a whole bunch of different things for me, but if you're ignorant, you don't even see it. And when you suffer in relation to something, you start to see it. And it's a proven point in our world. And then, so I'd rather have that suffering be meaningful than just like, it's just suffering. I think for me, it's just like, I would make a serious argument with somebody that just aligning with some sort of greater good that involves other human beings is almost in like you can't argue to me it's not good. Like, it's like any last things for you before we sort of close off this discussion?
I don't remember which book it came from, but it's one of the ones we have previously read. It's come up in conversation before, but there's that quote about a man who has a powerful why can put up with virtually any how. And so it's like, if you know why you are doing it, right? Why am I doing it? If my purpose is to be of service versus my purpose is to satisfy my ego, that purpose really helps clarify things when things inevitably get hard and motivation is low or the challenges are difficult. If you know your why, and your why is motivating and inspiring, then you are more likely to succeed. And maybe that's why Dr. Doty put it in as well. And I think, as you said, you can't really go wrong with, if your why has something to do with other people, either making things better for specific people or people in general, or making it so your relationships with people are better or closer, or building community. That is just so aligned with how our brains have evolved to be oriented towards other human beings, that it's also kind of going to capitalize on the default settings of the types of things our brains find salient, right? Cool.
That's a good round trip.
It really is. Okay, so to wrap it up, Nate, who would you who would you recommend this book to? Who do you think would benefit from reading this book?
To be honest, I think this is just a awesome bit of information for anybody on the planet who's moving in a direction or would like to move in a direction. I don't think you have to have, I think it hits more if you have some sort of understanding with a little bit of like how and what of the body, like brain, like not necessarily neuroscience, but like I think if you work with people, you're trying to move towards a task, or you help other people move towards tasks, I think fantastic. But I think it's honestly one of those pieces I think anybody could get something out of this book if you're coming in with an open mind, and don't get side quested by the neuroscience specific topics. Even like I like that, but if you don't have some sort of physiology, maybe it'd be hard to. But you get through that part, and then you get through the takeaways. Yeah,
You do. I would agree with that. I think Dr. Doty does a good job of like he explains the neuroscience stuff enough that even if you have no other neuroscience background, he will help you understand it. He kind of touches on it in a way that makes it easy for people to understand and doesn't go into too much depth so that you will get lost along the way. I think people who know a lot about neuroscience might be dissatisfied with this book because he does that, but I think it just makes it more accessible to people. And there's nothing that he said in how he explains the neuroscience that would contradict the knowledge that people have who have more depth on it. It's just that if you think this book is about neuroscience, it's not. It's about manifesting, and he brings in enough neuroscience so that people can understand why it's not magic, but it's actually science. I do agree that it would be good for pretty much anybody. It's a really easy read. It's not particularly long. And the whole last segment of it, so I'd say almost like 25% of the book, is he goes through each chapter kind of explaining the science behind each of these steps. And then at the end, he gives you this nice summary of like, okay, and here's a 6-week program of laying it all out. So it's essentially a brief summary of the whole of the rest of the book. So it's a light read. And I think particularly at this time of year where we're coming up on the new year, and I think a lot of people, whether they're effective or not, there are a lot of people who see the new year as a new start and start setting, whether it's resolutions or just wanting to set some new goals for themselves, to create like a vision. As I said, the manifestation stuff is coming up a lot in popular culture. And so if people are looking at manifestation and wanting to incorporate that as part of their like new year setting up goals for themselves strategy, I would like to point them to this book and away from some of those other fanciful resources, because this one will actually help you change your life. If you follow through with these practices. Some of them are not particularly sexy. It's not sexy to sit down and breathe for 10 minutes a day, because that's what your mindfulness practice looks like, right? But that is, like, you want to talk about taking small actionable steps that are meaningfully going to change your life. There is a ton of research out there about the benefits of having a 10-minute a day mindfulness practices across all kind of satisfaction and health outcomes and success outcomes that you could possibly want for yourself. So sometimes it is doing those small things that seem kind of boring. Those are the things that actually move the needle on your life. And so I just really appreciated this book for being so practical and applicable. Yeah. So let me ask you then, Nate, how are you going to implement Dr. Doty's manifestation techniques in your life? Are you planning to manifest things for yourself this coming year?
Yeah, so it's funny. I've never this is just like this was so new. This is like, and I think from what I interpreted for some of the things you've said, and maybe some things that I've heard before, this is a real good start to the topic. So I wanted to almost do like an experiment. I think there's some really good things here that would be good for trajectory long term, but I actually had some experiments that I would like to do with this process, and I was actually going to run through the 6-week process to enlighten. I've been dealing with a head injury for coming up on a full year now, and I haven't fully recovered. And so one of my little mini experiments for this was to apply it to fully recovering from this brain injury. And there's lots of notes that say we've discussed, but I was gonna one-on-one apply this to that goal, but also apply it to some other things that aligned with some of my priorities and some of the things I'd like to achieve over this year and over the next 5 and 10 years. And I like it as the framework for some of those tasks. The first one I'm going to apply it to is fully recovering from my brain injury. What about
Nice.
yourself? Do you have any specific implementations you're going to be using this framework on?
I think I don't have a specific goal that I'm going to apply the framework to, but I think like you, I'm actually going to do the 6 weeks. I'm going to sit down and do the week 1 of looking at what I am currently manifesting and dialing in a mindfulness practice. And then week 2, trying to clarify it. Because for me, a long time ago, I got away from doing like New Year's resolutions because they never stick. But what I am a big fan of is periodically checking in. And I kind of see it as like I visualize where is it that I want to be going in my life. And I see it as kind of setting my compass point in terms of like, here I am now, where is it that I want to be? How do I orient my compass toward that point, and then start the year with kind of clarity about what is my purpose? What are some of the things I have learned from the past year that I'm going to bring into the next year? What are some of the challenges and opportunities I'm anticipating this coming year? And how do I want those to go? And then set my compass point and then go. And so I'm going to use it for that purpose this year. So maybe we'll both try this over the course of 6 weeks, and maybe we'll have a follow-up episode where we touch base about what it was like to actually do it for a full 6 weeks.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea.
Okay, cool. So, Nate, how can the good creatures of this world find you on the internet?
So you can find me on all socials at Nate Bolding, and you can also find the podcast account on The Creatures We Become with TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube. And we'd love if you'd share your experiences, comments, and questions to those channels as things come up. Now, Petrina, how can our friends find you?
So you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Petrina Calder, and we would love to hear from you. Have you tried manifesting techniques? What worked for you? Please let us know by commenting on this episode. The Creatures We Become podcast is available on Spotify, YouTube, and on Apple Podcasts.
And also for a sneak peek in what's coming in January, we're going to be doing a little mini episode to share information about the podcast and where it's going to be going in 2026 and all of our exciting plans. And so if you have comments, suggestions, please reach out to us before the new year and even in the new year, and so that we can create good topics.
Yeah. Part of our plan is to have some regular episodes where we answer questions. So we want to have like some discussion topics ready to go. You can feel free to reach out to Nate and I through any of the channels anytime, because we want to make sure that we're focusing on things that are requested by our listeners and are of interest to you. So please don't hesitate to share your ideas with us. We are hoping to kind of create some community that is based on shared interests and kind of shared values around personal growth. So thank you for this conversation, Nate, and we will see you in the new year.
Thanks, Petrina. Happy holidays, and to you and all of our listeners. And thanks for taking the time to support our podcast. And we'll see you in 2026.